Ladies and gentlemen, most people spend their entire lives looking outward. They look for love in the words of others, and they search for their worth in the opinions of those around them. But there is something fundamentally flawed in that approach. If a tree grows only because the sun shines on it, what happens when the sky turns dark? If the roots are shallow, a small storm is enough to bring it down. Likewise, when your love for yourself depends on how others treat you, then your peace is always vulnerable, your identity always at risk. So, this is why love for oneself is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is a solid foundation upon which your entire life stands. It is not to be postponed until you become a good enough, a successful enough, or worthy enough. If you wait until you believe you deserve your love, you will wait forever. The truth is you already do. Simply because you are here, simply because you breathe. When a person understands this, a quiet shift begins within. No longer do they walk around begging for attention or approval. They no longer seek affection as a way to feel complete. Instead, they begin to recognize their completeness in the silence of being. This is not arrogance. It is wholeness. It is not separation. It is the realization that everything they have been chasing already exists inside them. Think of how you treat a loved one. You are patient with them. You forgive them when they make mistakes. You support them when they fall. And yet, when it comes to yourself, often the same grace is missing. You speak to yourself with harshness, criticize yourself for not being enough, and carry shame for things long past. But what if you turn that love inward? What if just for today you offered yourself the same kindness you so freely give to others? The practice of loving oneself is not about indulgence. It's about responsibility. It is about caring for your energy, your thoughts, your body, and your soul. It is choosing foods that nourish, movements that align, thoughts that heal, and environments that support your growth. It is walking away from what harms and toward what nurtures. It is waking up with the intention to protect your peace. Not because life will always be peaceful, but because your inner world deserves to be. Without self-love, everything else becomes distorted. Relationships become desperate, work becomes a form of identity, and achievement turns into compensation for inner emptiness. But when love lives within, everything else becomes an extension, not a substitute. You work not to prove yourself, to express yourself. You build relationships not out of need, but out of presence. You move through life not as someone seeking, but as someone sharing. To truly love yourself is to come home, to rest in the awareness that you are not lacking, that nothing needs to be added to you in order to make you complete. This is the essence of freedom, not to escape life, but to enter it fully, with the understanding that your inner state is not determined by outer conditions. It takes practice, daily, gently, consistently. But with each step, something begins to grow, a deeper calm, a clearer vision, a quieter confidence. And from this inner space, everything else becomes possible. So return to yourself again and again. Offer yourself the love you have waited for, because no one else can give it to you in the way you truly need it. Not because they do not care, but because that kind of love must come from within. There is a subtle, yet deeply rooted tendency in the human mind to look outward for proof of value. It begins early in life. A smile from a parent, applause from a teacher, praise from a friend. These external affirmations feel good, and gradually a pattern forms. You begin to tie your worth to how others respond to you. This habit becomes a silent prison. A person makes a small mistake, and immediately the voice says, "Why are you like this?" Something goes wrong, and the voice responds, "You're never enough." Without noticing it, this inner commentary becomes a constant source of pressure, fear, and emotional fatigue. But the deeper truth is this: the mind listens to everything you say about yourself, and it believes you. Just as water shapes to fit the vessel, your being begins to shape itself around your beliefs. If your inner language is harsh and judgmental, you begin to contract. You hesitate. You feel smaller than you are. But if your inner voice becomes one of patience, encouragement, and awareness, you begin to move with openness. Confidence is no longer forced. It grows naturally from within. To begin this transformation, one does not need to shout affirmations or deny their reality. It starts with observation, noticing what words arise when you fail, when you succeed, when you're alone, or when you're surrounded by others. You begin to ask, would I say these same things to a close friend? And often the answer is no. So why then is the self treated with such coldness? Changing the inner dialogue is a gentle practice. It is not about pretending everything is perfect. It is about speaking truth with kindness. When you fall, instead of saying, "I'm so stupid," you can say, "That didn't go as planned. What can I learn?" When you feel anxious, rather than saying, "What's wrong with me?" you can say, "It's okay to feel this. Let me breathe through it." These small shifts do not change your life overnight. But over time, they change your relationship with yourself, and that changes everything. Self-love is not always about doing more. Sometimes it's about doing less harm with your thoughts. Sometimes it's about being a little quieter inside so you can actually hear what your soul is asking for. When the mind becomes a space of compassion, the body begins to relax. Tension dissolves. The nervous system calms. You become more grounded, more present, more aligned with life as it is. Eventually, the inner voice becomes less of a critic and more of a companion. It no longer pushes you with fear, but moves you with clarity. You begin to walk with steadiness, not because the world becomes easier, but because your inner world becomes more supportive. You trust yourself, not because everything goes right, but because you know you will not abandon yourself when things go wrong. This is the practice. To meet yourself each day with awareness, to respond to your thoughts not with judgment, but with presence, and to remember again and again that how you speak to yourself, especially when no one else is listening, becomes the atmosphere in which your life unfolds. Choose words that heal. Choose silence that listens. And in that space, you will find the strength that needs no noise to be felt. Every action you take is an expression of how deeply you value your own life. But in the rush of daily living, in the noise of demands and distractions, many forget this simple truth. The way you breathe, the way you walk, the way you treat your body, the way you sit with your own thoughts, all of these are reflections of the relationship you have with yourself. Mindfulness is not just about meditation or stillness. It is about presence in each moment. And presence is a form of respect. When the mind is unconscious, you move through life automatically. You eat without tasting, speak without thinking, react without understanding. This unconsciousness leads to suffering because it disconnects you from the reality of what is. It turns your day into a series of tasks rather than moments of living. But when you begin to observe yourself, when you move with awareness, something shifts. Each step becomes deliberate. Each breath becomes sacred. Each choice becomes a reflection of self-regard, To live mindfully means to slow down enough to ask yourself, is this choice nurturing me? The food you consume, the information you absorb, the company you keep, all of it enters your system, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. If you are not careful, your inner space becomes cluttered. Exhaustion becomes normal. Disconnection becomes familiar. But this is not how life is meant to be experienced. You were not born to move like a machine. You were not meant to run endlessly without rest, to serve everyone but yourself, to carry burdens without pause. The body has wisdom. It speaks through tension, through fatigue, through discomfort. When you ignore these signals, you disconnect from your inner compass. But when you begin to listen, the body becomes your ally and you begin to live in harmony with your natural rhythm. This is what it means to respect yourself, to honor your limits without guilt, to nourish your body without shame, to choose silence when the world becomes too loud. It is not weakness to rest. It is not selfish to say no. It is not laziness to protect your energy. It is awareness. And awareness is power. When you begin to live with this kind of consciousness, you no longer wait for life to force you to slow down. You choose balance before burnout. You choose reflection before reaction. You choose alignment before achievement. Your days become less about how much you can do and more about how deeply you can live. Some will not understand this path. They will mistake your stillness for inactivity, your softness for fragility, your boundaries for isolation. What matters is that you remember your life is not a race. It is a sacred unfolding, and you are allowed to walk gently within it. There is great strength in those who live from the inside out. Their power does not come from loudness or control, but from clarity. They move not to impress, but to express. They serve not from emptiness, but from overflow. And they give not because they have to, but because they choose to, from a place of fullness. So treat your own life as something precious, not occasionally, but daily. Not only when things go wrong, but even more so when things are calm. Tend to your inner space as you would a garden, with patience, with care, with love, because how you live moment to moment is not just a routine. It is your message to life itself. I am awake, I am aware, I am aware, and I am worthy of my own attention. There is a quiet strength in those who accept their imperfections, not because they have given up on growth, but because they understand that true growth does not come from self-rejection. It arises from a deeper place, a place of understanding, of patience, and of inner alignment. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to evolve, to experience, to awaken. And sometimes the most painful moments are the ones that open the door to that awakening. Life will present you with many mirrors. Some will reflect your strengths, others will expose your shadows, but both are necessary. The challenge is not to avoid the darkness, but to face it without fear, to recognize that your wounds do not make you weak, they make you real. Each scar is evidence that you did not run, that you stayed, that you endured, and most importantly, that you are still here. You are not broken, even when you feel fractured, even when the path is unclear. There is a wholeness within you that cannot be destroyed. It may be buried beneath layers of pain, regret, or confusion, but it is still there, untouched, undisturbed. What's required is not to fix yourself, but to remove what covers that inner truth. Growth is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. It happens in the moments when you choose not to repeat the same reaction, when you pause before speaking, when you forgive even though it still hurts, when you get back up even though part of you wants to give up. These are not small victories. They are the steps of inner transformation, the proof that evolution is taking place even when no one else is it. It's easy to celebrate yourself when you're winning, when everything aligns and success is visible. But the deeper love, the more important kind, is the love you offer to yourself when things are falling apart. When you feel lost, when progress seems slow or invisible, that is when self-love is tested. That is when you must remember your worth is not measured by how far you've come or how fast you're growing. It is constant, it is inherent, it is beyond condition. Sometimes, evolution requires you to let go of identities you've carried for years, the roles you thought defined you, the stories you've told yourself about who you are. And this can be painful, because even if those roles were limiting, they were familiar. But growth asks for space. It asks for you to shed the layers that no longer fit, not with force, but with grace. You don't need to rush your becoming. Nature doesn't hurry, and yet everything unfolds in perfect timing. Trust that your journey is doing the same, even when it feels messy, even when you feel uncertain. Some of the most powerful changes happen in silence, not in the noise of doing, but in the stillness of being. So sit with yourself, not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be honored. Listen, not just to your thoughts, but to the spaces between them, and notice how life begins to move differently when you stop fighting it. When you begin to accept yourself as you are, you create the foundation for who you are becoming. This is the paradox, that healing begins when you stop trying to be someone else. When you recognize that your current self is not the end, but the bridge. Not a failure, but a stage. Not broken, but becoming. And from this understanding, you move forward not with desperation, but with quiet certainty that everything you are is enough for the next step. When the heart becomes still and begins to understand itself, it starts to emit a different kind of presence. This presence is not loud, not demanding, not seeking attention. It moves softly, but it moves deeply. It does not force itself upon others, yet it is felt. A person who has begun to fill themselves with love from within, rather than waiting to be filled by others. You do not need to chase people, beg for affection, or perform in order to feel seen. When love is cultivated within, it radiates outward, not through words, but through energy. Not through appearance, but through presence. People may not always be able to describe it, but they feel it. They feel it. They feel safe around you. They feel calm. They feel that they are being seen not by someone who needs them, but by someone who is already whole. This kind of love does not come overnight. It is grown slowly, patiently. It begins with the decision to stop abandoning yourself. It begins when you choose to sit with your pain instead of escaping it. It begins when you recognize your patterns of seeking approval and gently guide yourself back inward. With each act of self-respect, with each moment of silence, with each breath of awareness, something begins to shift. You no longer reach outward with desperation. You begin to expand inward with grace. And from this expansion, a natural sharing begins. Not forced, not manipulated, but effortless. Just as the sun shines without effort, just as the flower offers its fragrance without thinking, your presence begins to nourish others, not because you are trying to, but because it has become your nature. You carry peace because you have made peace with yourself. You carry clarity because you have met your confusion with patience. You carry love because you have stopped waiting for it to arrive and instead have built it from the inside. Many people try to influence the world around them through force or persuasion. But the most lasting influence does not come from force. It comes from alignment. When a person is aligned within themselves, others sense it. It inspires without effort. It teaches without preaching. It uplifts without preaching recognition. This is the natural outcome of self-love. But because this kind of love is not based on need, it cannot be taken away. It is not at risk. It is not fragile. External circumstances may change. People may come and go. Praise may rise and fall. But the love within remains like a steady flame in the center of the chest. It flickers sometimes, yes, but it does not go out because it is no longer dependent on anything outside. To reach the space is not to become separate from others. It is to become more deeply connected, but from a different place. You no longer relate to others from emptiness, but from fullness. You give not because you lack, but because you have. You listen not to gain something, but to understand. You hold space not to fix, but to allow. This is the beauty of inner cultivation. When you become your own source, you stop being a burden to others and you become a blessing instead. And the more you nourish yourself, the more there is to give, not because you must, but because it overflows. So do not wait. Begin now. Sit quietly. Breathe. Listen. Offer yourself even the smallest act of kindness. Water the soil of your being. Because what grows within you will not only transform your life, it will naturally reach those around you, just as light touches everything it meets without needing to try.